Are we waiting for 7?
That would get us to quorum. I think there was also an idea that we would discuss election stuff today.
Yeah, because we could probably do like the question answer without quorum if we wanted to.
Agreed.
You've got quorum now. Joe just joined.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm late all.
Perfect. Paris, are you the one who, it looks like you're recording now? So we're all good?
Yep.
All right. Welcome to the September 4th, 2019 version of the Kubernetes Steering Committee meeting. My name is Philip Whitrock, and I'll be bosoning today. So it looks like the topics are pretty light. We got the FYI CNCF Governing Board meeting September 13th with end of term for Brandon in 2019 and Michelle in 2020. Are either Brandon or Michelle on today?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Hey.
Hey. Yeah, it's just first governing board meeting that's remote in a while. So that's all there is. I don't have an agenda yet.
Brennan, we should get on that. I'll like ping you after this.
All right. Moving on today. Actually, before we do the Q&A, there's a couple comments on the future topics. One, Brandon, the boomerang thing, I think that can just be removed. Unless anyone wants to keep it there. Okay. And then Michelle, I saw, let's add some meat to the definition of a working.
That's really old. I think that Brian Grant did some work around that already.
Okay, I can at least strike through these. If I can figure out how, there we go. Perfect. And then SIG PM participating in tracking the backlog. Is that one pretty old too?
Pretty old, still available if y'all are interested in that. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe just leave it there and then revisit in a number of weeks.
Stephen, is that an offer for the SIG PM to help the steering committee participate and track our backlog?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Then yes, we should take you up on that.
Cool.
Thanks for the clarity.
Yeah.
All right, I'll update the notes to reflect that. Do you need anything for that to make that happen?
No, outside of access to edit your board, if you have a board already. There's a SIG PM GitHub team that I can find and post, and if you add that, we'll to like write access, we'll be able to edit it.
All right. Cool. All right, let's move on to the QA for those who think of running for steering. Did anyone have a vision for exactly how this is going to go? Like, Paris, do you think we should just do like raise the hands in the participant thing?
So I know Dim's extended the invite, so maybe he wants to comment.
Hi. So the way I was thinking about this was we wanted to give an opportunity for the people who are standing for election to ask questions about what we do, both on the private meeting as well as the public meeting, how we do the boson process, how we track milestones and things like that, just to get you up to speed I mean, that was one aspect of it. The other aspect is about what we think the future of Kubernetes should be. That's a whole another bucket of things that we could talk about. But it's mostly open floor. It's up to you all to ask questions. We can, if you have like a specific scenario or a specific thing that you wanted to question, ask about, why we took a decision or something like that, then that is another thing that we could talk about as well.
I think in seeing what happens in the elections, I think it might be incumbent upon us to be realistic about what is the charter of steering and what are the expectations of the role, right? Understanding what are the limits and the bounds of what this steering position entails. Right?
I think it's also worth saying that these rules aren't written in stone. I think some of the way that the steering committee has acted initially, I think was a light hand, just because bootstrapping that whole process, we wanted to make sure that, the consent of the governed type of thing. But I think, as we move towards the bootstrap positions aging out, there's a lot more sort of clear mandate. And so I think there is room for the steering committee to change rules and do things their own way.
So,
Anybody wants to start other than, Steven, you can go first.
so I'll drop 3 questions. So one, so if anyone had the opportunity to see my nomination thread, that there were questions around like the ability to run. So I think that there could probably be some clarification in documentation. I think we solved it on the thread, but clarification and documentation would be helpful. The second one is there were questions around like what happens with the Bootstrap committee afterwards. I'm not sure if anyone has ever discussed term limits for steering committee members or some sort of rotation, like if you've been on for, you must wait X amount of terms before being able to rerun. And then I guess overall clarification, I have a fair understanding of what y'all do. But the clarification around like Jesse Frizzell's email about like, hey, if you want to help user pain, like alleviate user pain, like I don't think this is the forum for that. I think overall, like the entire project should be dedicated to that. But SIG PM, SIG usability, SIG contributor experience are all great places if you want to help alleviate user pain. And then the individual SIGs should be helping on that stuff too. So maybe 3 comments as opposed to questions.
Well, I can jump in with at least a couple of pieces in answer. I think the third one is a much longer discussion, but generally, to Joe's point, we've been doing this as a very light hand, and not having it about the project software, but having it about how the project is organized and run. So the software, so it depends on who you mean by user in this case, because if it's user contributor, that's different, and the steering committee might have more opinions about it. But if it's an end user of Kubernetes, then I agree, the whole project needs to be paying attention to that. And just the same way we have contributor experience, we at some point need some user experience focus. So then backing up from that one, actually, I may have to go to the first one first. The first question was who can run, and it may be solved as well in the thread, and that's grand. The original thought was choosing, and this is how the Bootstrap committee came to this plan, was we could either constrain who could run or who could vote. And then from there be able to manage the process a lot more evenly and even-handedly and avoid astroturfing. And we decided that we wanted to limit who could vote more than we wanted to limit who could run, because that would self-select for people that were the governed functionally, the people in the project, to choose someone that they respect, may have come from industry and not participated for long, but they know has done good work in the past, or someone maybe who has been in the project a long time, but isn't particularly publicly well known, but the people who are in the project know them. So we wanted that to be the case. And now I've lost the middle question.
Well, I think there was a
I think
comment. I think, the middle question, if I remember correctly, Stephen, was essentially like a lot of folks that want to actually, like Jesse's thing, like make Kubernetes easier to use. And that's not the job of steering committee. Yes and no, I would say there. I would say it's not directly the job of steering committee to be able to actually sort of do the job of like contrivx or do the job of like, different SIGs around sort of making the thing easier to use. But what the steering committee can do is actually redirect resources and create incentives and create. So a lot of times when we're talking about stuff, we're talking about like, what are the carrots and sticks we can do to shape behavior of folks to actually move the project in a certain direction. And again, light hand, we don't want to be overbearing with it, but like the idea is that the steering committee does have some levers that they can use to move things, like asking the CNCF for money and helping to manage that budget to be able to actually bring folks to really, do more in certain areas, right? I think, the SIG docs is a great example there.
And more carrot than stick, just to clarify.
I think a lot of times with the sticks are like, like, how do we say, hey, you have to have this to be able to do that, right? Like, we're going to punish people. Yeah.
To be fair, we are the final stop, right? I mean, when something goes wrong or when something needs to be done.
Well, I call it the arbiter of last recourse. Like you only if can't be solved elsewhere.
Yeah, the main goal is to head off those kinds of issues and to set up the project so that it functions properly. So in the past couple of years, a lot of work has gone into formalizing the rules and guidance and conventions around how are SIGs formed and dissolved, how are working groups formed and dissolved, what are even working groups was just brought up. So yeah, Jace had created a bunch of documents around there. I just double checked. Those are in the community repo. Recently, we introduced user groups, right? Charters was, Dim's just mentioned in a comment. Phil and others put work into that. So a lot of the focus has been on laying that groundwork and setting up the structure so that the project can function. The funding is a recent bit that has been coming into place about how does the project request funding from the CNCF and manage that. In the past, a lot of these things were done informally. And as the project scales and matures and people come on and off the project, it's useful to just have a procedure written down for how things should be done so it doesn't have to be figured out again from scratch.
Yeah, and I think that's been such a challenging thing, is to just not take the easy route and fix the problem really quickly. It's that the process that Brian described, like you really gotta, it's challenging, but you really gotta like figure out what the process should be and have it vetted and take the critiques and then find some compromises and collaborate and iterate until you never want to look at that piece of document again. So yeah, I mean, like people, I think that steering is this like high place, but a lot of it is just like a lot of grunt work, and it takes time and it takes patience, and you got to be willing to talk to people and hear them out and listen to, concerns and feelings and address those. And yeah, just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, just one simple example from the most recent election. And this isn't the first election we've had, but we have some rules written about things like a certain number of voting members from different organizations must +1 the candidate for them to qualify. But if you look at all the +1s, nobody provides the information we need to actually vet the +1s, right? So we're going to postmortem the election process and what went well and what didn't went well. And, definitely things like that, they're just made clear from the beginning, then that's a problem that never happens. for the next one?
It's constant tuning of all the intersections of messy, messy peopleness.
Yeah, I think it's less about solving specific problems and more about enabling the community to get past those problems.
Mhm. As much by setting up a precedent or defining a process, but yeah.
Yeah, like Code of Conduct Committee is another thing that happened recently, or has been underway for a while.
Right. And
Yeah,
the other thing,
Good. Oh, I had no idea how to set any of that up. I had never done that before, and I just had to come up with a document. And Brandon gave me a lot of good feedback, and then we passed it off to the steering committee, and they did a round. And looking back, it totally wasn't perfect. And as an engineer, you just have to be okay with like imperfect work, and you got to iterate. So that's just something to be said.
yeah. Also, a lot of research about how people have done this before in other organizations, other foundations, and try to learn from them and try to talk to them about what worked for them, what they could have done differently, and bring that as feedback when we are doing something is also something very important.
Yeah, this is less about advocating any particular direction as so much as finding and aligning interests so that the project can move forward, and to Philip's point, delegate as much as possible out to the other groups. I think it was Tim that said arbiter of last resort, which is a great way to describe it.
So I have at least 3 more questions, but I want to give other people opportunities to ask too.
Someone ask a question so Stephen can ask his other questions.
I'll ask a question just to throw something out there. Dims, how'd you feel about the onboarding process to the steering committee?
We have to write it down. It was just me, so it was easy for people to throw me into the ACLs. So this time around there will be more people. So while we are doing it, I'll have to write it down.
Cool.
Or get somebody to write it down.
Thank you. Stephen, you can ask your question now.
Okay, so we mentioned funding, CNCF funding. There was a thread going at some point regarding like diversity scholarships for KubeCon, other events. I know that there has been some documentation in process, probably a PR that is either up or merged at this point. But I'm starting to get questions like on the release team. So I wanted to see where we're at with that.
Okay. So I can handle that. So the diversity scholarship is run by CNCF, but then we figured out that there are people that we would like to bring to the contributor summit, for example, and we want a process for getting some funding for it, as well as some selecting some people who we wish to invite to the contributor summit and then KubeCon. So currently, we have a proposal that Paris and George wrote up. It is in a PR form. It has not. It's currently we are. The rest of the people on the steering committee are looking at it, but there is a hold on that PR right now because CNCF mentioned that Dan Cohn mentioned that CNCF is trying to do the same thing and trying to roll the same process out for all the projects, where the projects can come up with a set of people that they would like to invite. For us, it's about people who have roles in, for example, the release team or Contrabex, or who would not be able to travel otherwise. We would like to bring them, and who might not fit into the diversity, category there. As well as the other issue is that they have only a limited number of people that they can get as well, right? And that needs to be spread across, the entire CNCF. So we would like to prioritize some people that we can bring with us. Does that help, Stephen?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So the TLDR there is also for San Diego. If you have names of people, please pass it along. But by next KubeCon, we'll have a process ironed out by then.
And George dropped a link into the GitHub pull request.
Thanks, George.
You may all be asking, how much does being a member of the steering committee pay? And the answer is 0.
And there's a significant time investment when we're playing our game well.
Well, I will say that, like, going to things like KubeCon, like I think we do like a panel, and because you're on a panel, you're like a speaker, and then like so you get like the ticket to KubeCon. So that's something.
Right. Maybe it's time to turn the tables and ask people who we know have nominated themselves or are nominated to speak up a little bit. Do we want to do that, Phil?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Paris, how much time do you need for your 2 items?
Less than 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll make sure that we have at least 5 minutes at the end. Yeah, let's do that.
Can I interrupt just to have a short conversation about electioneering? Because we as the steering committee said that we were not doing any electioneering for any particular nominees. So I'm a little bit worried in this conversation if we give airtime on our steering committee meeting to people who have nominated themselves or nominated others, that this could turn into stump speeches, whereas I'm more interested in the questions at this point. Because we didn't make any sort of announcement that anyone who was nominated would get time to speak broadly. So I'm a little bit worried about that. Anyone else have thoughts or concerns about this?
No, that's a fair point. We could, if we want to make that available, we should announce it and schedule it separately.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Michelle has something.
Yeah, I just, I would really love if we could go around, if some steering members had some concrete things that they'd like to see get done in the next term. I think other than questions are way more important, but a question I would like to see answered in this forum is what would we like to see happen? Because this is an opportunity for us to kind of tell people who are interested in this role what the work is actually going to look like. And this is what you're signing up for. Go ahead, Brian.
We could populate the backlog with stuff for them to do.
Ooh.
That's
Or
fair.
at least for them to discuss.
For them to discuss, yes.
I'm into it.
Close them all, but that would be one way to convey the information to the next steering committee.
But Brian, for example, if you were today, this thing really needs to be solved and you don't have the bandwidth to do it. What is the most immediate pressing thing that you think would need some attention?
Yeah, I would have to think about that.
Okay, I won't put you on the spot then.
And probably if something urgent needed to be done, we should have sent out a plea for help.
I don't think this is urgent but important, but I would love to see, just in that idea of carrots and sticks, I'd love to see the steering committee, curate a sort of hotspots and actually be hey, kudos to the folks who are working on this to essentially provide a little bit of direction. And then, whatever, support necessary to say hey, these are the things that we think are critical in the project right now where we need more help. I think, using that bully pulpit could be useful.
Yeah, I want to echo that sentiment in that what we've seen over time, and I don't know how to solve this, is partially governance and this is partially beyond governance, is that how do we prevent the tragedy of the commons that we already see befalling us today? Many of us already have worked in this project for a long time, but we see it already. There are key areas of the project that have been underfunded. And it's very difficult, and I don't know how to solve this problem, and I don't know how to incentivize to make it happen. So I think that's a key problem with this project, or any open source project for that matter, is like, how do you make sure that vested interest parties do not just try to extract value from the project, but also help to solve common problems that exist across the entire state space, and don't see it as a lever for some form of differentiation. Right? Sometimes some history for open source business models indicates that having a chaotic, bad upstream is actually in their best interests. So.
Jim,
I
is
agree.
you're next.
Yeah. I'll say what I usually say in this kind of topic, right? So we are currently geared towards full-time contributors who are working on only on this project. They might be doing other things, but mostly they are doing Kubernetes, whether inside or outside. We are not geared towards occasional contributors. We don't use the long tail. So that is one of the things that I've been trying to encourage in different spaces. So that is something that I would like to continue to see happen, especially, in specific SIGs, things are okay, but then we don't have people who can span SIGs. We do not have a replacement for Jordan, for example, right? So, people have to grow beyond their individual SIGs, and then so it's harder for people to do that now, I feel. And it's difficult to cultivate people to get to that point. And we have to do something better, and we have to figure out ways and means of doing it, I think.
So I think that we're also, now that CNCF is starting to propagate their own SIGs, the question becomes like, how many meetings do I go to? How do I provide valuable feedback through the Kubernetes project and back up to the CNCF? That's something that's been on my mind recently too.
Going back to Michelle's question, and I think it's along the lines of what Tim was saying about tragedy of the commons. One thing that I find very challenging now is just understanding what's going on across the entire project is super challenging. Like if you think about an engineering effort involving hundreds of engineers broken down into several sub-teams, there would be a lot of management infrastructure. There would be project management, there would be people managers, there would be ways for information flow, processes. We're kind of lacking that. And the organizational complexity is quite high. The project has its own org structure. I don't even know how many subgroups we have, like on the order of 50 subgroups. And those are populated by people who come from their own organizations with their own goals, right? So, we have some underfunded areas. One thing I found in the past is that new people coming to the project weren't aware that those areas were underfunded. And occasionally we have pleas for people to help with VUI or with docs or some other specific area, but managing that over time, like how much work is in the backlog and how much progress are the different areas making and where do we have gaps, is something that we haven't really addressed very holistically in the project. So that was something that was pitched to SIG PM at some point, and we tried various things like having the SIGs report summaries of what they've been doing to the community meeting and things like that, but none of the things we have tried, whether it's the roll board or whatever, seems to really adequately address the problem. So I think new ideas in that space would be valuable.
So I'll jump in and tie this to what Stephen was saying as well, because one of the things that I think has been a real challenge with the first many years of this community has been the development of artifacts that aren't video. We do a lot of things in video, and development of searchable stories and decisions and communication in that way. So to Stephen's point, how do we get cross SIG communication? To Brian's point, we've asked SIGs to write summaries and share summaries across the community, and that has been more and less effective depending on the SIG. But this is an ongoing problem, and it's one that that we have not yet mastered, because there's just too many lines of communication and not a good way to get a summary perspective of what's going on.
Right. Another thing that comes to mind is, we've always talked about we need to stabilize the code, and we need, we are not getting a chance to do that. And typically the November-December timeframe is a good time to do that. But then we don't want to push the mandate from the top. It needs to come from the bottom. And how do you tell SIGs to put the brakes on the features and prioritize the bug fixes? Our PRs and issues are still a mess, and a lot of people have declared bankruptcy on the GitHub notification. That's a whole another problem. Right, Tim.
I guess one thing I'd add to the list of things people could work on would be making it so that you don't have to be a member of the steering committee to do whatever you're here to do, and having the governance of the project be owned by the broader community and anyone who wants to participate. We experimented a little bit with this, where I think the working group governance was done by a collection of community members, and I think it went pretty well. But that sort of engagement, keeping that self-sustaining, actually would require, for a period of time, someone continually engaged in being able to bootstrap that community.
I have a comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. And then Michelle has something.
I just wanted to say that most of the problems that we just talked about here are problems with many open source projects. So we have to also think about that. And it might seem daunting to us because we're living it, but other people live this too. And I've been spending a lot of time with other open source projects in talking with them about how we can solve this together. So I think that that's an opportunity for us, because people look up to us as a very large project. So that's just my comment there for folks who are like, whoa, this is a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's hard and we're the leaders. Is that what you said, Paris?
Yeah, pretty much. TLDR.
Okay, Michelle?
I think Lockie has a question, so I'll let him go.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it was just a comment. I mean, and I do have a question as well, on the back of what Dims was saying, is it actually the responsibility of the steering committee to set technical direction and say we should feature on stability rather than enhancements? That's not stated in the charter. So I was just wondering if that should be delegated out, in my opinion, and freestanding if SIGs want to take that on. It is in the charter?
Technical direction is not part of our charter. Technical direction
Non-technical
is
is.
part.
Right. Yeah, I was just reviewing. So yeah, my question now, while I have the microphone, is really, how's the dynamic been, and have you found this, I think we touched on it briefly, an effective forum to make decisions between the parties that are members of the steering committee? What are the forums that you have, and are they effective?
Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead, Brandon. I've been talking too long.
Yeah, I would say that this particular meeting is probably not where a majority of the decision making happens. We do have mailing lists, both public and private mailing lists, where we discuss pressing issues, generally come to a consensus, and then we may have a preamble and like a post-amble on that discussion, but a lot of it does happen in conversations not on this.
And second part of that, while you're there, Brandon, is that effective, do you think, under the current steering committee, those forums?
I don't know that it's ever going to happen.
Go ahead, Brendan.
No, I think he was talking to you. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's effective as any like distributed decision making with 9 people involved can be effective.
I think we've grown a lot in the way that we communicate and hash out decisions. I'm really proud of it. I think that a lot of really great decisions have gotten made at in-person conversations. And looking back, I really wish we had had more time for those kinds of get-togethers. And they've just been really effective. We all like to talk a lot, and and it's a lot easier when we can like shame each other for talking out of turn in person and like throw things at each other. So that's been kind of fun.
Hey Michelle, this is Derek. I'm not trying to cut you off either, but I just wanted to, like, I think in my 2 years now with the committee, most of what I've observed is we try to decide who is going to make a decision, who we are going to empower to do something versus us doing it ourselves. And so I would say, in my experience so far, our bias towards empowering others to make more local decisions has been largely effective. And if that's the root of your question, I think thus far that approach has worked okay, and hopefully others feel similarly.
I think the other component of this, which I was putting in the chat, is that as leadership across the project, we all have to work to align interests. So sometimes with something like a stability release, there would be a lot of conversations among the leaders of the project. So that would be leaders of large SIGs, that would be leaders of SIG architecture, that would be all of SIG architecture, that would be the steering committee. But the idea being that there is work from this group also to align interests as well as delegating.
Okay, have we scared anybody yet?
I'd like to know more about the kind of work that happens behind the scenes that we don't either see because it's private or just because it's less obvious.
Document writing.
Aligning interests, lots of side conversations.
I think there's a degree of discussion of the relationship with CNCF also.
Yeah, good point. That's a big one that we discussed privately.
Yeah, I would say that the CNCF community and the Kubernetes community are actually pretty different. There's a different flavor there. And I think, we look at things like SIGs and the CNCF, and they have the same name as SIGs and Kubernetes, but they're really sort of different purposes, different ways of working. And so, slipping that clutch between sort of the needs and the motivations and the way that Kubernetes works and the way the CNCF work is sometimes pretty tricky.
Stephen, did you have your hand raised?
Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no, totally fine. It's I just have more questions, so I think we can close this conversation first. All right, I can ask more questions. So what do you think of teams? So like we have quite a few governance structures, and we have started to, or I think myself and multiple people have started to see like things crop up that are working group-esque, but should exist for a longer time than just the fuzzy span of like what a working group is. So like product security committee comes to mind. It was a team, it became a committee. I don't know why exactly, because it like operates a little bit of both. There's kind of a little bit of both there. Test infra on call, working group, Kate's infra, like those are all things that could potentially be a team, but like we don't have the idea of a team yet. Like it needs to, like those are things that need to consistently be staffed for the project to be successful.
Right. I can talk about the Kate's infra if you want, or if somebody else wants to talk, please tell me. So for the Kate's, we've tried to find the right bucket for the current situation. And one of the things for Kate's infra, what we were saying was, we don't want the group to exist for a really long time. We want this group to transfer the assets and get things going. But then over the long term, we need to get staffing, either from members of the company or from CNCF to actually get full-time people to do this. And the example that we were talking about was in ASF, the infrastructure is full-time, manned by full-time people. So that was one example.
So that's what I'm kind of alluding to. Like, we're essentially staffing a cross-company team. How do we do that? How do we draft policy for that? Should that be a separate governance structure?
Well, I mean, I can tell you the theory. Like right now we have, working groups, committees, and SIGs are sort of the three things that we have. I think, the user groups are a separate thing, but wasn't part of the original thinking here. And when we first talked about this, we talked about, there's essentially a foursquare where it's like open and public, open membership, public communications, closed membership with the possibility of private communications. And then the question of whether these things are sort of ad hoc temporary or whether they're sort of like long-term and own things, right? With the idea that like steering committee, security, like response stuff, and code of conduct fall into that committee where there's private communications and it's sort of a named membership. But then the rest of the stuff is either SIGs or working groups, which are ownership and open or ad hoc and open. I think my take on it would be like, if there's a need for a team, do that within the SIG. You can organize that. I don't know that we need to actually have another top level thing under Kubernetes. But if there's support that's needed for sort of keeping track or whatever, I think that that's something that, everybody would be open to. But I'm not sure that we need a separate thing from SIG. That'd be my take. But
yeah.
And then maybe to add on that, like, what are you specifically looking, like, what do you need? Like, because the governance structures we have in place now exist for a couple different reasons. Some are like to help define decision-making and ownership. Others are to provide like communication tools such as discussion forums and meeting times and that sort of thing. Is there like a specific need you have that you feel the existing structure doesn't fulfill?
I guess not with the Zoom chat happening as well. Like for SIG release, we recently spun up the release managers group, which lives inside of release engineering sub-project, right? And that's essentially the aggregate of build admins who are Googlers with the access to like push the button to sign packages on behalf of Kubernetes, the branch management squad, the patch release team, and the SIG chairs, right? There's also like the GitHub administration team. So I think that maybe sub-projects is the right place for that.
All right, 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to switch to Paris's 2 items.
So noting again, so Paris mentioned something about the sub-project owners are responsible for staffing. I'm not sure how that, like, I think there's a wider staffing need for things like Kate's infra, because we're basically saying that, like, one, this needs to be it needs to not be a Google effort, it needs to be a community effort. It needs to be funded by the community, essentially, or there has to be a mandate for the companies that are participating in that, right? So I think that, like, I don't know, like, if that's something that Kubernetes handles or the individual companies handles, or how that works.
In the past, that has been dialogue between the project and individual companies. For example, if we needed to staff documentation, yes, the CNCF did fund one person, but we also went to other individual companies to ask for help. Or credits for testing is another example that has come up. So it's pretty easy to tell, like, which companies have heavy investments in the project in terms of in terms of people, in terms of its role in their products. So that is just something where right now the project needs to do outreach to those companies to ask for what they need. It's hard to have a hard mandate about that. That has not been done in the past.
So we say the project, right? So if this becomes something that is under sub-project ownership, how do sub-project owners essentially garner the clout required to speak to companies to help fund this effort?
I mean, they can work through the steering committee also. Like, I think if a SIG came to the steering committee saying, like, this is a critical thing for the project, and like, we don't have enough people, let's problem solve together. I think that that's a totally appropriate interaction with the steering committee.
Michelle also pointed out that your developer reps on the CNCF board can also advocate within the CNCF.
And
Lockie had his hand raised.
Oh yeah, I'll let him go.
I was just going to ask if the current steering members have any advice for the nominees coming in. Joe, you're smiling.
I mean, I think part of it is that, like, I'm excited that we're getting new folks in because bring new perspective, right? So I think, we've been talking about a bunch of stuff here, but like, I also think that like, there's problems and creativity and ways to solve them that, we're old fogies at this point. I think new passion, new creativity is actually going to be awesome. So I don't want to put my thumb on the scale.
I'm guessing that was advice about what to do on the steering committee, not how to get elected.
Yes. Come on. I come from a socialist country. Can't campaign. Taxpayers' money.
I'll add. I think that we will, like, gosh, there's so many things. I could write an essay. But I think we need to use the roll board more. That's one piece of advice. I will write, Dims, you know what? I will write an essay. I will. Blog post coming soon. Yeah, just be super patient. There's a lot of, like Joe mentioned, we need a lot of new creative folks. Don't be afraid to ask, nascent question, like newbie questions and stuff, because the likely answer is we don't have a process for that, or we don't know, or it's been done this way and that just doesn't work anymore. So yeah.
Okay. Maybe if that topic's closed, we can just make sure Paris gets her chance to do her final 2 items and then come back if there's anything else. So Paris, do you want to do the contributor survey?
Yes.
Is that your
Yes. So we are doing the 2019 contributor survey from Contributor Experience, and I wanted to ask all of the steering committee members if you want to pulse on the community at all, please comment on that issue. There's some other retro items from last year too for what we learned about the survey, but please comment. I'd like to get this out ASAP with the deadline to have something pretty by the Contributor Summit in November so that we can present some of that data there. So that's just an FYI, nothing needed for the call right now. And then the next item is about the Contributor Summit and what you all would like to do with any potential sessions there. We do have a placeholder in for you right now for 15 minutes at the end, which we usually did with Q&A. But now that you have a session on the main track, or at least 3 of you do, then just want to know what you want to do there, essentially, because we're about to start planning the schedule, and that's going to go out within the next, I'd say, 3 to 4 weeks.
Paris, the thought there was to add the new members who are coming in.
Yep.
And so we'll make sure that everybody on the steering will be on stage.
Okay.
In the main track. So that's for sure. Yeah.
But then the placeholder for right now until new folks come on, and then we can make some last minute decisions with new folks, if that's cool with you.
Yes, that sounds like a good thing to do.
Okay, cool. All right, placeholder will remain. That's it for me. Oh, and I think George also had an item on the agenda as well.
Yeah, George.
Yeah, just real quick, just a reminder that the deadlines for everyone is next Wednesday, exactly a week from today. Those of you running, you need to have your candidate bios put in there. Please don't put it off. It's hard to get like the 300 words, right? And then after that, in about a month from now, the election will be concluded. So just wanted to remind everybody, I will continue to post every Wednesday the status of that week and the upcoming deadlines on the Kubernetes mailing list. Thanks.
George, I wanted to ask about the exception process. How is that working out? Have people made use of it yet?
Yes, we've been PRing the people directly into the voters.md. Actually, that reminds me, don't assume that you're in voters.md. Everyone, please go through there and check. I found a few instances where people had like their GitHub thing misconfigured or something, and we're getting the right things, and we can work through it. That's all easier to do before the ballots go out.
Would you put a link in the doc?
I will do so.
Thanks.
If you do request an exemption, please make it clear what your contributions to the project were. And things like what is your GitHub ID, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, it's been a little challenging to figure out who the person was and what they had done in the community. But yeah, I mean, a few people have exercised it, not that many.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to the overall voting population.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers, but it feels about the same as it was last time.
Yeah, we had a lot more the first election. We had quite a few the first election from what I remember, and this time it's more of a handful.
Mm-hmm. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. All right, awesome. We got 5 minutes left. Did anyone have any final advice regarding what they do? I saw a couple in the chat from.
Yeah, we met, a few of us commented in the chat, which is probably a good thing to play with.
Jared, do you want to like repeat, or Joe, do you want to repeat, or would you like me to read it out loud?
You can read it.
All right.
It comes with more authority.
Okay. From Joe, late take. The best thing SC can do is activate others, find, stoke, and harness the energy of the community. From Sarah, +1 Joe, SC isn't a platform for driving an individual issue, much more about aligning interests and learning from the community. Clayton Derek, +1, and that's all on that topic.
Wait, no, I have one more. Okay, y'all should really get to know each other super well. I'm like so ready to pass this baton. I don't know if y'all can tell because I'm really excited. I'm really excited for Fresh Blood. But yeah, so y'all should get to know each other really well. I think we all have different strengths. Like if I really need to hammer out a document, I'll be like, Phil, can you please help me? Because I know that it will go to completion. And if I'm like, I don't want to deal with this particular issue because I don't have the bandwidth, I know Jims can just like, take off with it, and I don't really think about anything. So like every person I realize has a strength that could go on, but I think like knowing those things helps a lot, and y'all have to like work together and all that cheesy stuff. So get to know each other, get to know each other's strengths. I'll reserve the rest for my novel.
Yeah, from me, I would say just ping me and we can talk more. So open invitation. Thank you.
I'll say the same thing. If anyone wants to chat with me about what it has been over the last several years, I'm happy to.
Likewise. All right. Thank you, everyone. And see you all, I don't know, next public meeting.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Is this your last one, though?
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah, what your next one is, hold on, let's see.
Should
Thanks,
we do
bootstrappers.
or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're next. I think you actually do have one more meeting. We don't announce the winners until the 3rd, right, George? Or anybody?
It's the 4th, the day after.
So yeah, you'll actually have one.
No, you're right, the 3rd. Sorry.
Yeah, you'll have one more. You'll have one more full meeting with the Bootstrap committee. So this is not your last one.
Okay. Yeah, we should come in costume or something.
I'll take an item. We should definitely like have 5 minutes for all y'all to say goodbye as we're announcing the new members, maybe, or something.
We're not dying, George.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
I did.
This is emeritus and reference points and happy to help.
Yeah.
And
I did send a thank you email already to all of you.
I want to see Tim in his glasses again, and Phil the whole time.
Yeah, we can do that. I can bring all the glasses I've ever worn.
So I know we're about to leave, but what I should have asked was, what do y'all plan to do next now that you're not on the steering committee? But maybe that's a later thing.
Raise
maybe
hell
for our
elsewhere.
final. Yeah.
Take a nap.
Yes.
All right, have a good one, everyone.
Bye.